Before you lies a detailed, ironic, and grim story about the everyday life of a simple medieval baker. This is not a heroic saga of feats and great discoveries. There is no room here for romance, victories, or luck. Instead, you will find 20 chapters filled with routine, exhaustion, dirt, fear, and the never ending struggle for survival. But before you get comfortable, please like this video and subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm really curious to see who has joined us. Now, get cozy. We're about to begin. You do not remember the last time you truly woke up rested. The sensation of cold stone pressing against your back is your first memory of every morning. Well, if you can call this hour morning. The moon is still stubbornly hanging in the black sky, casting its pallid light through the only crack in the wooden shutter. If you are lucky, the rats have not chewed another hole in the straw mattress. If you are less lucky, you find your foot tangled in last night's dirty linen and your head ringing with the echo of distant shouting from the neighboring alley. The air is thick, not with the rich scent of fresh bread, but with damp, mold, and the persistent tang of old fat. The fire is long dead. Your small oven, a battered, soot stained relic passed down from someone else's grandfather, sits cold and silent in the center of the shop, which is also your bedroom, your kitchen, your storage, and sometimes, if you're feeling generous, a place for a sickly neighbor to rest in the corner. No one comes here for comfort. Comfort is a thing for the priest's house up the hill, or perhaps for the Lord's steward, who has never set foot in a baker's home unless he's bringing bad news. You sit up, rubbing the numbness out of your legs and the crust from your eyes, and you try not to think about how much your back hurts or why your chest feels so tight. You are young, but the work makes you old. You have not even baked the day's bread yet, and already you are exhausted. The world outside is silent for a moment. No roosters yet, no market calls, not even the familiar jangle of the night watch's bell. It is the hour of ghosts, the time when every creak in the beams could be the start of the roof caving in or a thief trying the door. But mostly, it is the hour of bakers. And it is your hour, whether you like it or not. Your hands reach for the bundle of old cloth you use as a tunic. You pull it over your head and try to ignore the sourness of sweat and smoke. You pull on your boots, which are not really boots, but more like leather sacks stitched together by someone who was not a cobbler. You stretch, and your bones protest. Somewhere behind the shop wall, the neighbor's dog starts barking, a sound that means someone else is awake, possibly for reasons worse than your own. You listen, just in case. Silence returns. Time to check the stores. The shelf where you keep your precious bags of flour is more like a board nailed to the wall, and you run your fingers over the lumpy cloth sacks to count even in the darkness. There is not enough flour. There is never enough flour. You made a deal with the miller last week, and he shorted you again, swore on his dead mother that he was honest, but you know the game. The bread you will make today will be smaller, coarser, a little more sour. People will complain, but they will eat it. They always eat it. Hunger is the best seasoning. You stand and look around your little kingdom of dust and crumbs. It is not much, but it is yours for now. Your heart races for a moment with the memory of the last tax collector's visit, how his eyes lingered on the small copper coins you keep under a loose stone, how he seemed to measure the size of your badge before deciding how much you owed. If you are lucky, he will not return for a month. If you are unlucky, well, you try not to think about that. The room is still so cold. You want to stay in bed, to burrow under the thin blanket and pretend you live in a world where someone else bakes the bread and you simply eat it. But no one is coming to save you, and there is bread to be made. If you do not start the fire soon, the dough will not rise, and the people will come banging on your door with their coins and their curses, demanding their daily share of misery. You drag yourself to your feet, feeling every bruise from yesterday. Your fingers are stiff, your knuckles cracked. You flex your hands, because soon they will be in cold water, kneading dough, shoveling ashes, lifting sacks of flour heavier than you wish to admit. You take a moment to close your eyes and breathe, because this is the best it will get today. You are a baker. No one thanks you for your labor, and no one pities you for your pain. If the bread is too hard, they spit it out. If it is too soft, they call you a thief, accusing you of watering down the dough. If you charge a little more, they say you are greedy. If you charge a little less, they wonder what is wrong with your bread. It is a losing game, and you are always playing. You step into the darkness, feeling for the door. The wood is rough, splintering under your fingers. You open it, and the world outside is even colder, but it is also yours, for now. You are awake. The day has begun. No one is going to live it for you. You close the door behind you, listening for the footsteps of rats or the whisper of wind through the stones. In another hour, the city will wake, and the streets will fill with the sounds of haggling, shouting, weeping, praying, cursing, for now you are alone with your flour, your fire, and your fate. This is how every day begins. Cold, tired, and not nearly as hungry as you will be by the end. You live above the bakery, but calling it home is a courtesy, a sort of unfunny joke you repeat to yourself when you are feeling brave enough to laugh at your own life. Your room is not really a room, just a cramped, sloping nook tucked beneath the roof beams, every inch of it saturated with the sharp, persistent smell of scorched flour and damp rot. The walls, if you can call them that, are rough planks set crookedly into each other, so full of gaps that you can see the flicker of the neighbor's candle through the boards on a windless night. In the rainy season, water seeps in and drips onto your sleeping mat in time with your own slow, resentful heartbeat. When you step down from your rickety sleeping loft and survey your domain, the bakery reveals itself as the heart of your existence, a single smoky chamber, all function and no beauty. Blackened rafters overhead, grimy floor beneath your feet, and a pervading sense of something not quite living, not quite dead, lurking in every shadow. In one corner, sacks of grain and flour huddle together like beggars, hoping not to be noticed. In another, a stack of cracked pottery bowls, most chipped, some repaired with pitch, one or two on the verge of collapse if you so much as look at them the wrong way. The hearth takes up most of one wall, gaping and soot choked, the iron oven door warped from decades of unkind fires. You keep a battered wooden table under the window, mostly to catch the rain that inevitably leaks in during storms. The window itself is little more than a hole in the wall, shuttered by a piece of wood that swells in the rain and warps in the sun. When you try to open it, you must force it with your shoulder, and every time you wonder if it will finally split in two and leave you exposed to the street's endless noise and stink. Your neighbors are a parade of misfortune, united only by their proximity to your own. To one side is the carpenter. He has a wife who shouts from dawn to dusk, her voice rising above even the clamor of hammer and saw. Their children are a feral pack, running barefoot through the alleys, pinching scraps of bread when they think you are not looking. The carpenter himself is a gaunt, hollow eyed man who smells of glue, sweat, and hopelessness. Sometimes he stops by your door and asks for stale ends of bread for his supper, and you give them because you know the favor may be returned one cold night when you need a board replaced or a door wedged shut. On the other side is the cobbler, or what passes for one, a man with more broken shoes than teeth, who drinks away most of his earnings and spends the rest cursing at anyone foolish enough to knock at his door. He owes you a pair of decent boots, but you will never see them. If you are lucky, you will avoid his eye in the mornings as he staggers out to empty his chamber pot onto the street, grumbling about the rotten stench of bakers and thieves in the night. Behind you, in a dank alley that never sees the sun, lives the rag picker and his mother. You rarely see either of them by daylight, but at night you hear them scraping through the rubbish heaps, searching for scraps they might sell or eat. Their window is always dark. Once you heard a scream from there, but nobody in the street so much as turned their head. In this neighborhood, everyone minds their own pain. Above you, in the eaves, is a world that belongs to the rats and pigeons. Every evening, you hear them scrabbling and cooing, fighting over crumbs, sometimes falling onto your bed or into your flour sacks. You fight them with brooms, shouts, prayers, and even the occasional borrowed cat, but the rats always return, smarter and bolder than before. Some nights, they grow so loud you wonder if they are planning something, a small rebellion, a coup d'etat of the attic. Your life is conducted to a chorus of constant noise. The carpenter's hammer at sunrise, the cobbler's curses, the children's shrieks, the endless foot traffic of merchants, beggars, and drunks outside your door. At night, when you finally lie down to rest, the city's soundtrack only shifts, trading voices for the yowling of stray cats and the eerie wailing of someone, somewhere, whose suffering is a little too familiar. Privacy is a luxury here. The walls, such as they are, keep out little more than the wind. Gossip and rumors slip through the cracks with ease. Everyone knows when you last made a good batch, when your bread came out burned, when the miller shorted you on flour, when the tax collector threatened you, when your last customer screamed about moldy crust. Sometimes it seems that the only thing thicker than the smoke in your bakery is the web of petty grievances that binds the neighborhood together. Still, this place is yours. You defend it from thieves with a club and from rats with a curse. You patch the roof yourself or bribe the carpenter with bread crusts to help you. You mend your own clothes, scrape the wax from your own candle ends, and sweep the floor every morning, though the dirt never truly disappears. Outside, the city grows louder with every passing minute. A cart rolls over the cobbles, sending up a cloud of dust and dung. Somewhere, a dog barks, and somewhere else, a fight breaks out. You sigh, remembering that all these people are your potential customers or your next headache. The sun, such as it is, begins to edge above the rooftops, illuminating the grime on your windows and the cracks in your walls. It is another day in the same room, among the same neighbors, facing the same relentless struggle to keep a roof over your head and bread in your belly. You tell yourself it could be worse, but you are not sure how. You pick up your empty water bucket, step out onto the splintered stairs, and try not to trip over the sleeping dog in the doorway. Down in the street, the day's troubles are already gathering like a storm. Every day, you are reminded that water, the very essence of life, is a commodity to be fought for, begged for, and sometimes stolen. The well is your destination this morning, as it is every morning, and your battered wooden bucket, leaking at the seams, patched with bits of string and hope, hangs heavy from your hand. Already your back aches at the thought of the walk. Outside, the city is shaking itself awake. The street is a broken river of mud and refuse, a mix of rotting vegetables, human waste, chicken feathers, and the occasional dead rat. Your boots, such as they are, make a soft sucking sound in the muck as you pick your way past the carpenter's front step, past the cobbler's empty bottle rolling in the gutter, past the rag picker's alley, where you try not to look at what's moving in. The shadows. The well is not close, and it is never deserted. As you approach, you hear the argument before you see the crowd. A tangle of housewives, apprentices, old men, scrawny children, and, of course, the market dogs, all jostling for a place in line. The well itself is a grand structure in theory, a deep, ancient hole lined with mossy stones and crowned with a splintering wooden cover. In practice, it is a social battleground, a venue for the city's daily theater of misery. You take your place at the end of the queue, already 6 people long. At the head of the line, 2 women are locked in the eternal dispute over who arrived first. Their shrill voices blend with the scrape of the rope and the creak of the winch. Someone spits into the street, and someone else shoves a little too hard, setting off another squabble. A little boy dashes between your legs. holding a cracked jug. He glares up at you with the haunted, hungry eyes of a child who knows too much about disappointment. As the line inches forward, you study the others. There's old Marjorie, who runs the laundry behind the apothecary, her hands red and swollen from years of cold water and lye. Next to her, a baker's rival, Janek, who always seems to get the best flour, probably by cheating or sleeping with the miller's ugly daughter. You catch his eye. He smirks as if to say, "You'll always be behind me, friend." You ignore him. This early in the morning, you have enough enemies without making new ones. When your turn comes, you set your bucket down, careful not to let the frayed rope slip from your fingers. The well's crank is slick with slime. You wrap your sleeve around it and lower the bucket, watching as it disappears into darkness. The sound of water, somewhere far below, is almost soothing until you realize how shallow it seems today. There are rumors that the city's aqueducts are clogged, or worse, poisoned by some feud between the mayor and the bishop. But nobody cares about rumors at this hour, except to repeat them with extra venom. You haul up the bucket, your arms trembling. At first, it seems heavy enough, but when you peer inside, you see him only a few inches of murky water, swirling with bits of leaf and something that looks suspiciously like a worm. No one is surprised by this. No one complains. This is just how things are. A child snickers as you pick out the floating debris with your fingers. You remind yourself you will boil it anyway and hope that will be enough to keep the next bout of sickness at bay. The return journey is no less unpleasant than the way out. The street is fuller now, merchants shouting as they set up their stalls, the first wave of beggars making their rounds. A man with a wheelbarrow nearly runs you down, curses you for being in his way, then grins with the broken teeth of someone who has not tasted bread in a week. You nod, step aside, and hope he does not remember you the next time he is drunk and looking for a free loaf. By the time you reach your own crooked door, your arms are burning, your back throbs, and the water in the bucket has sloshed out, leaving you with even less than you started with. You set the bucket down on your kitchen table and watch as a beetle swims in lazy circles near the surface. With a resigned sigh, you flick it out onto the floor, where it joins the general melee of insects making themselves at home in your bakery. Fetching water is the most basic task, and yet it seems to sap more strength than all the others combined. You think, not for the first time, of all the ways water can kill you: by sickness, by cold, by the slow rot it brings to the beams above your head and the bread you bake each day. And yet you have no choice but to keep coming back every morning, bucket in hand, ready for another round in the city's endless contest of who will be thirsty last. In the corner, your flour sack sits, already looking a little less full than it did yesterday. You imagine the water mixing with the flour, the beginnings of dough that will soon become today's bread. You hope, foolishly, that the customers will not notice the flavor or the color or the odd texture that comes from using whatever water you could find. But they always notice, they always complain. And tomorrow you will do it all again, because the bread must be made and the water must be fetched, no matter how dirty, how heavy, or how short the supply. You wipe your hands on your apron, grimy with yesterday's flour, and look at the bucket. It seems smaller every day, just like your life. With a long sigh, you pick up your tools and prepare for the next struggle, knowing there is no reward for doing what must be done, only punishment if you fail. Of all the ingredients required to make a loaf of bread, flour, water, a little salt, even the reluctant rise of yeast, none are so cursed, so begrudged, and so necessary as firewood. In the stories, bakers simply toss logs into the oven, but in your life, each stick of wood is a small fortune, and every splinter is paid for in pain. Firewood, it seems, is always rarer, heavier, and more precious than bread itself. You survey your dwindling pile with the same feeling you might reserve for a purse with its last coin. 3 logs remain, the best you could scavenge after yesterday's dismal market. Each is heavy with damp, sapped of its vigor by the rains, flecked with lichen and rot. You turn them in your hands, judging which one will burn quickest, which one will smolder, which one will fight you until the very end, refusing to catch even after you have fanned the embers with your aching breath. There is, as always, a choice. You can try to stretch what you have, bake only a few loaves, and hope no one notices when your shelves run empty before noon. Or you can risk the alleys and try your luck at finding more, a risky venture, one that may cost you more than you gain. Stepping out into the lane, you keep a wary eye on the neighbors. The carpenter's sons are out, fighting over a branch. You consider asking for a scrap, but their father has warned them wood is dear even to those with tools. Down by the tanner's shop, the gutters are lined with shavings, all soaked in foul smelling liquid. You pick through them, selecting only what seems less likely to poison the day's bread. A passing washerwoman laughs at your efforts, tells you she saw old Peter down by the river with a barrow full of kindling. She suggests, with a wink, that Peter's wood comes from places best not mentioned. Some say he steals from the churchyard, others that he strips the supports from abandoned houses. You wonder if a little sacrilege is a fair price for a warm oven. You pass through the market, eyes low, hoping to avoid the woodmongers and their accusations. Last week, you were caught picking up a stray plank, and the memory of the constable's stick against your back still aches. Every load of firewood must be accounted for, every stick taxed, and yet, somehow, every oven in the city is burning, every pot is boiling, every kiln is firing, everyone is stealing, everyone is lying, and only the unlucky are caught. You finally barter for a half-rotten beam with a rag picker, trading a crust of bread and a promise you have no intention of keeping. The beam is awkward, too long for your oven, and crawling with beetles, but it is better than nothing. On your way home, you slip behind the cooper's shop and break off a handful of staves from a discarded barrel, hoping no one sees. The truth is, everyone sees, but no one speaks. Tomorrow they may be the ones sneaking through the alleys, praying not to be caught. Back in the bakery, you break the wood down with a dull hatchet, every blow sending a spray of mold and bark across your flour sack. Your hands, already raw from kneading, soon sport new blisters and splinters. By the time the wood is ready, you are sweating and your back is a knot of pain. There is sawdust everywhere, in your shoes, in your sleeves, probably in the dough if you are not careful. The fire itself is a beast that must be tamed anew each morning. You stack the wood in the hearth carefully because you know how easily the smoke can choke the oven and the baker alike. You crouch low, blowing on the meager flame, coaxing it with dry straw and a prayer to saints you do not believe in. Your hands shake from cold and fatigue. Your nose fills with the stinging bite of smoke. When the fire finally catches, it is a victory so minor that you cannot even muster relief, only the next worry. Will it be enough? Will the fire last long enough to bake the day's loaves? Or will it sputter out before you are halfway finished, leaving you with doughy masses and the bitter complaints of hungry neighbors? Sometimes you dream of a life where firewood is simply there, stacked neatly beside the oven, waiting to be used. You imagine a world where bread is baked for pleasure, not for survival, where you are praised for your skill and not punished for your shortages. But those are only dreams, and you are awake, your lungs full of smoke, your fingers full of splinters, your mind full of dread. You pause to look at your small pile, now slightly larger, though still pitiful. You know how quickly it will vanish. In the city, everything vanishes quickly: bread, money, kindness, wood. You are not the only one who struggles, but this knowledge brings no comfort, only a sort of grim solidarity with the other wretches who sneak through alleys and lie to constables and barter with rag pickers for rotten beams. There is no triumph here, only the next task. You brush the sawdust from your apron, wipe your brow with a sleeve, and go to check the dough. The day's labor is just beginning, and already you feel as though you have used up everything you had to give. But the fire is burning, if only for a little while, and that is enough for now. The sack of flour sits on the shelf like a taunt, a pale and lumpy reminder that nothing is ever quite sufficient. The miller promised you enough to last until Sunday, but today is only Wednesday, and you are already scraping at the corners, searching for the last good handful among the dust and beetle shells. Your fingers plunge into the sack, feeling for anything that resembles real flour, a futile hope, since the texture tells you more than your eyes ever could. Gritty, uneven, half sifted, the best you will get until the next harvest, or the next bribe, or the next ill advised favor. The truth is that everyone is lying about their grain: the miller, the merchant, even the city's inspectors, who are supposed to check that you do not cut your flour with straw or sweepings. You lie too, in your way, scooping out the worst clumps of mold and dead weevils and hiding the rest under the thinnest layer of passable flour. Some mornings, You are so desperate that you grind up dried peas or old chestnuts, mixing them in and praying no one notices the change in taste. The wealthier clients might notice. The poor, you suspect, would eat sawdust if it came in the right shape. You take stock of what you have. 2 sacks, one nearly empty, the other suspiciously heavier on one side where the damp has crept in from the wall. The smell is sharp, sour, familiar. You know from bitter experience that bread made from damp flour will grow blue-green fuzz in a day, and yet there is nothing else. The city is full of bread that spoils before it is eaten. Just another part of the cycle, just another complaint for the list. Sometimes you dream of the harvest festivals of your childhood, if those were not dreams at all. You remember tables groaning under the weight of fresh loaves, golden and soft, and the rare feeling of eating bread until you are full. But here in the city, every loaf is rationed, every crumb watched with suspicion. You cannot help but feel a mean kind of envy when you see the miller's wife with white flour on her dress, as if she has been rolling in wealth itself. Meanwhile, you measure out your own flour by the handful, counting out every scoop as if it were silver coins. Today, as you pour the flour into the mixing trough, a dark cloud of insects rises. You cough and swipe at them, trying to catch at least a few before they disappear under the table or into your dough. You have long since stopped caring about the occasional beetle. Some say they are full of protein, and besides, it is not as if anyone will thank you for your effort. If you spend too long picking out the bugs, you will lose the daylight needed for baking, and angry customers will be at your door before you can say, fresh batch. Once, long ago, you tried to complain to the miller about the quality. He laughed, spat on the floor, and reminded you that no one else would sell to a baker with no credit and a reputation for speaking his mind. You learned your lesson, you grit your teeth, take what you are given, and hope that the next sack is only marginally worse than the last. Sometimes you hear rumors about a shipment of fine flour coming in from the countryside, a treasure reserved for the tables of the wealthy, the bishop, the magistrate, the merchant's wife. You tell yourself it does not matter, that all bread tastes the same when you are hungry enough. But you cannot shake the feeling of being cheated, of always coming last in a race you never agreed to run. Each day, the flour seems lighter, the loaves smaller, the complaints louder. Why is there grit in my bread? The cobbler's wife wails, waving a loaf like a club. My husband chipped a tooth. You try to explain about the stones in the mill, about the bits of sand that are impossible to avoid, but no one listens. They only remember the bread their mother made, softer, whiter, sweeter, back in the village, before the city swallowed them whole. You know the rules, though. If the bread is too small or too rough, the city inspectors will fine you. If it is too pale, you will be accused of theft, stealing flour, watering the dough, cheating your neighbors. If you are caught mixing in anything but pure wheat flour, the punishment is a public shaming, a mark on your door, sometimes worse. You have seen bakers run out of the city for less. But what choice do you have? You cannot make bread from dreams. You try to ration what you have. The best flour goes to the loaves for the priest, the magistrate, and the occasional rich merchant who wanders into your district. The rest is for the poor, the hungry, the desperate. You cut the dough with old barley or mashed turnips or whatever else will stretch it a little further. You tell yourself it is clever, resourceful, even necessary. But at night, when the hunger gnaws at your own belly, you know it is just another kind of theft, one that no one will ever forgive you for, least of all yourself. On days when the wind is right, you can smell the other bakeries, richer, better supplied, closer to the castle. Their bread is lighter, airier, full of flavor. You hear their laughter, the sound of coins ringing in their tills, and you wonder what it is like to bake without fear. Here, in your own little corner, you sift out the worst lumps, mix the rest, and hope the city's mouth is too hungry to taste the difference. As you knead the dough, a cloud of flour clings to your arms, your hair, your lungs. You breathe it in, let it settle in your nose and throat, and tell yourself it is the smell of work. You press out the air, fold the dough, shape it into rounds and loaves and twists, each one a little different, each one a little smaller than yesterday's. There is never enough, not of anything, and yet you bake. Tomorrow you will go to the miller again, hat in hand, ready for the next round of lies and disappointments. Tonight you will count your loaves, your coins, your regrets, and find them all wanting. But for now, there is still flour in the trough and dough beneath your hands. You work because work is the only thing that stands between you and hunger. And maybe, if you are lucky, someone will come by at the end of the day and trade you a story for a heel of bread. At least stories are never in short supply. You would think, after all these years, you and the oven would have come to an understanding. But no. Every morning is a fresh negotiation with an inanimate, insatiable beast. The oven is your greatest tool and your greatest enemy. It sits in the back of the bakery, a mouth carved from stone, dark and scarred from countless fires, its iron door warped by centuries of heat and carelessness. You sometimes dream the oven is alive, breathing, watching, hungry for more than just wood and dough, hungry for mistakes. The first step, always, is clearing out the ashes from yesterday's struggle. The tools are simple: a bent iron poker, a worn out broom, a pan with a hole in the bottom, and a handle ready to snap. You kneel down in front of the oven, careful not to breathe too deeply. The ashes are fine as flour and rise in gray clouds with the slightest touch, sticking to your sweat and getting under your fingernails. Every handful is a reminder of what was burned away, what little warmth you managed to trap, what was lost to the smoke. Of course, some days you wake to find that the embers never truly died. The heat lingers, treacherous and hidden, just waiting for your fingers to stray too close. You have a patchwork of scars to prove how easily the oven bites. Your hands are a map of burn marks, some fresh and angry, some so old and faded you have forgotten their origin. But this is the price of bread. Pain is as regular as salt in your daily recipe. You stack the firewood, if it can still be called that, into the black maw of the oven, each piece chosen for its shape, its dryness, its meager promise of heat. Too damp, and you will have a day of smoke and cursing. Too dry, and it will all vanish in a rush, leaving you with nothing but cold bricks and hungry customers. You mutter a quick prayer, not to any saint, but to the wood itself, asking for mercy. The wood is indifferent. Then comes the kindling, shavings, bark, maybe even a twist of old straw. You strike a spark, shield it from the draft, coax the tiniest flame into being. The smoke comes before the fire, thick and stinging, curling out of the oven and straight into your eyes. You cough, eyes watering, nose running, the taste of soot settling on your tongue. The room fills with haze, making every beam of sunlight look sickly and pale. You learn to work in the dark, blinking through smoke, feeling for the edges of the oven with one hand while you feed the fire with the other. Sometimes the fire takes quickly, flaring up with a greedy roar. More often, it sulks and spits, demanding more kindling, more patience, more of the precious firewood you worked so hard to scrounge. If you misjudge, if the wood is too green or the air too damp, the smoke will not rise up the chimney. It will linger, pressing down against the ceiling, curling under doors, worming its way into every sack of flour, every loaf you have already baked, every fiber of your hair and clothes. On a good day, the fire tames itself, and the oven stones heat evenly, radiating a steady, comforting warmth that means your bread will bake golden and crisp. On a bad day, and there are many bad days, the fire never quite catches, or worse, burns too hot and too quick, turning your loaves into cinders and your bakery into a choking inferno. You have nightmares of fire leaping from the oven, devouring not just your bread, but your home, your neighbors, your whole miserable street. There is no escaping the smoke. It clings to you, follows you everywhere. Your hair smells of it. Your skin tastes of it. When you walk down the street, dogs lift their noses, sensing the embers in your pockets. You could wash your hands 100 times, and still the soot would remain, caught in the cracks and creases, marking you as a baker as surely as a brand. Sometimes, when the smoke is thickest and the fire refuses to listen, you remember stories of faraway places where bread is baked in the open air or in magical ovens that light themselves, never burn, never choke their bakers half to death. You cannot imagine such places really exist. Here, everything is hard, everything is dirty, and nothing is ever quite enough. The other problem is the chimney. In theory, it draws the smoke up and out. In reality, it is a crooked hole full of old nests and new cobwebs, half blocked by last season's soot. You have climbed onto the roof more times than you care to count, dangling by one hand while you scrape at the opening with a stick or, in desperate times, your bare fingers. The city is always full of new birds, new rats, new obstructions. If you are unlucky, a neighbor will complain to the city inspector, and then you will have more trouble. They will fine you, threaten you, warn you about the dangers of fire and plague and community health. All you want is for your oven to do what it is supposed to do: get hot, stay hot, and leave you alone. Eventually, the fire gives in, as it always does. The oven stones glow with a dull red promise. The smoke thins, the room settles, you lean back, exhausted, soot streaked, blinking the last tears from your eyes. The dough is ready, the air is thick with anticipation and the fading taste of ashes. You tell yourself again that tomorrow will be better, that next time the wood will be drier, the fire easier, the smoke less. But you know the truth. There will always be smoke, and there will always be pain, and there will always be another morning spent kneeling in front of the fire, making bargains with the oven that never keep. The city outside is just starting to wake, but here, in the heart of your smoky little world, the real work has already begun, and the day stretches ahead, full of promises broken and bread half burnt. You might think that mixing dough is a simple thing: just flour, water, and a little bit of salt, maybe yeast if you are lucky or clever. But nothing in your world is ever simple. The trough is rough hewn wood, worn smooth only where 1,000 hands, yours and your father's, maybe some poor apprentices before you, have kneaded, scraped, and cursed. The bottom is warped, the sides splintered. You check for the worst of the splinters before you start, but there is always at least one waiting for a careless palm. The flour is weighed, the water measured as best as your tired eyes can guess. Sometimes the mixture is too dry, sometimes too wet. Sometimes you add a handful of last night's cold, sticky leavings, hoping it will coax a little more rise from the stubborn mass. If there is a scrap of yesterday's sourdough starter left, and it has not gone completely gray and fuzzy, you use that too, scraping it out with your thumb and a muttered oath. The salt, precious as silver, is rationed with trembling fingers. Not enough, and the bread is flat and bitter, too much, and you will hear about it for weeks from every mouth in the street. There is no margin for error, only the certainty that someone will always find fault. You plunge your hands into the mix, feeling the chill of the water bite your knuckles, the grit of the flour working itself into your cracked skin. The first motions are always hardest. The dough is stubborn, thick as old mud, and you have to lean in, shoulders braced, arms straining. Every joint in your fingers aches. The cold seeps through your hands into your bones, a reminder that the world is never quite warm enough. Kneading is an act of will, a contest between you and the dough. You push, you fold, you slap and turn, coaxing it to life, trying to ignore the pulsing throb in your wrists. There is no art to it, only repetition and a kind of dull endurance. You hear the city begin to stir, boots on cobblestones, a donkey braying, the distant shouts of traders arguing over something that is not your business. Your head swims with the rhythm of work. Fold, push, turn. The dough resists, then yields, then sticks to your fingers as if it intends to take a piece of you with it into the oven. Every so often, a nail catches on a chip in the trough. You swear, jerk your hand back, and inspect the damage, a ragged slice already filling with flour and the faint sting of salt. You wipe your palm on your apron, see the smudge of blood, and try not to think about what happens when wounds go bad. There is no time for bandages. The dough is waiting, and bread waits for no one. A fly lands on the rim of the trough, drawn by the smell of fermenting flour. You swat it away, only for two more to take its place. The flies are as much a part of the bakery as the dough itself. No matter how much you sweep, how much you curse and chase and clap, they always return. In summer, they seem to multiply by the minute, crawling over your hands and face, leaving tiny black footprints on everything. You do not want to think about where else they have been. Your mind wanders as you need. You think of all the bakers before you, all the hands that have worked dough in this same room, some gone to the grave, some gone to the debtor's prison, some simply vanished. You wonder what they thought about as they worked. Did they hope, as you do, that today's loaves would be just good enough to keep the customers quiet? Did they dream of soft beds and full bellies? Or did they too feel only the dull ache of their bodies, the never ending demand for more? Sometimes, when the dough is soft and springy under your palms, you allow yourself a moment of pride. Maybe this batch will be better. Maybe the bread will come out golden and light, the crust just so, the crumbs soft as clouds. But mostly, you feel only relief when the kneading is over. You scrape the sticky dough off your hands with a bit of wood, flick it back into the trough, and look at your fingers, red and raw, nails packed with flour and dirt. The dough must rest. You cover it with a rag that once belonged to your mother, now patched, stained, nearly see through, and set it in the warmest spot you can find, which is never quite warm enough. You watch for signs of life, the slow bubble of air, the faint rise, the subtle shift in color. You know better than to expect miracles. Half the time, the dough refuses to rise at all, sulking in the cold and damp. When that happens, you work it again, add another scrap of sourness, and hope for the best. You have no other options. The waiting is as much a torment as the work. While the dough rises, you clean the trough, sweep the flour from the floor, count your coins, check your woodpile again. Every minute is measured. If you forget the dough even for a little while, it may rise too much or not at all, and the difference is a day's worth of complaints and lost coins. You are always moving, always watching, always worrying. If the dough rises, you shape it into loaves, pinching the seams closed with fingers that barely bend. You line them up on a plank, dusting each with what little flour remains. If you are lucky, there will be enough for two batches. If not, someone will go hungry tonight. Maybe you, maybe your neighbor, maybe the rag picker who trades stories for crusts. You think about the dough, about how it takes the shape you give it and then resists, always trying to spring back. You wonder if that is what you have become, shaped by hands you cannot see, pushed and pulled by forces beyond your control, always returning to the same tired form. The dough waits. You wait. The city outside is loud and impatient. You are quiet and tired, and there is still so much more to do before the first loaf is even baked. Your bakery, such as it is, does not exist in a vacuum. The walls are thin enough that every shout, every barked insult, every peal of laughter from next door becomes your business whether you want it or not. Most mornings, the noise starts before the sun is truly up, echoing through the alleyways, mingling with the far off clang of the cathedral bell and the closer, sharper ring of a pot thrown at someone's head. You listen to these sounds as you work, trying to distinguish threat from entertainment. Here, the difference is subtle. To your right is Janek, another baker. His shop is only a few paces away, close enough that you can smell when he burns his loaves, which annoyingly is not nearly often enough. Janek is not your friend, nor is he your enemy. He is something much more exhausting, a rival. He claims his bread is softer, his crust crispier, his hands cleaner. You know he cheats, adding chalk to whiten his flour, watering his dough to stretch it a little further. You know because you have done the same, and neither of you have the luxury to pretend otherwise. Janek's window is always suspiciously bright, the glass cleaner than yours, his sign painted fresh every spring. Some say his cousin works at the mill and that he gets the best flour, always the first pick of the season. Others say he pays off the city inspectors with sweet rolls and the promise of a loaf set aside. You personally think Janek just works harder than he lets on. No one keeps a bakery that clean without giving up sleep, food, or both. He smiles at you most mornings, a thin lipped, knowing smile. Bread smells good today, neighbor, he will say, and you will nod, not trusting yourself to answer. The last time you mentioned the mildew creeping along his back wall, you found a dead rat on your doorstep. The message was clear. Competition is tolerated, but only up to a point. To your left is the butcher. His name is Tomas, and his temper is legendary. Some days, the stench from his back room is so thick it leaks through the wall, mixing with the scent of baking bread into a miasma that makes you gag. Tomas likes to remind you, loudly, that no one ever died from a tough loaf, but plenty from bad meat. You suspect he is right, but you would never say it out loud. His apprentices are known thieves. They will swipe a heel of bread off your window ledge if you turn your back for even a moment. Still, there are days when a scrap of bacon ends up in your kitchen, no questions asked, in exchange for a half loaf of rye and a promise to look the other way when his scales are miscalibrated. Across the street is the alewife, Marta, who brews the bitterest beer in the city. On good days, her voice carries down the lane as she haggles with merchants, berates lazy apprentices, or serenades her own casks. You have seen her knock a man out with one hand while pouring ale with the other. She laughs at your bread, says it is too dry, but she is always the first in line when the market bell rings. She will trade you a mug of something that tastes almost like hops for a still warm loaf, and for a few brief minutes, both of you can pretend to be satisfied. But neighbors are not just business partners or occasional trading posts. They are also spies, judges, and sometimes, when the mood is right, co conspirators. Every mistake you make will be discussed at length over stew and cheap wine. When your fire burns low and your loaves come out heavy, everyone knows by midday. When a rat is found baked into someone's bread, it has happened, though you still maintain it was a trick played by Janek. You can expect to hear about it for the rest of the year. The walls have ears, the streets have eyes. Your life is as public as a hanging. Sometimes neighbors band together against a common enemy, usually the city guards or the tax collector. Once a month, the collector makes his rounds, and you all trade warnings, watch the shadows for the flash of his uniform, and try to hide your meager savings. On these days, the rivalry softens, replaced by a kind of grim solidarity. Tomish might slip you a sausage as you board up your coin box. Janek might look the other way when your flour delivery is a little heavier than usual. Even Marta's laughter grows quieter, less mocking, as you all count your losses. But as soon as the threat passes, the old games return. The apprentices throw stones at your windows. The butcher's boys try to lure your customers with promises of meat pies. And Janek starts a rumor about worms in your bread. You respond in kind, muttering just loud enough that the priest hears about the time Janek's rolls tasted faintly of soap. By evening, the entire street is a tangle of grievances, alliances, and whispered threats. It is not just the grown-ups who cause trouble. The children, wild and unsupervised, treat the alley as their personal kingdom. They filch crusts from your window, leave muddy footprints across your threshold, and laugh when you chase them with your broom. You recognize most of them: the carpenter's twins with their gap-toothed grins, the washerwoman's youngest girl who once tried to trade you a dead bird for a piece of pie, the rag picker's boy who knows all the best hiding spots for rats and for coins. There is no escaping the eyes of the neighborhood. On days when you wish only for silence, the city seems to conspire to keep you busy. If you are lucky, the neighbors ignore you. If you are unlucky, someone bangs on your door, demanding an explanation for the sourness in yesterday's bread or the sudden appearance of weevils in the flour. Your explanations do not matter. What matters is that someone must be blamed, and today, that someone is you. At night, you hear the stories: who cheated whom, whose son stole what, whose roof is leaking, whose oven nearly exploded. You hear laughter and curses, the soft thud of fists on wood, the distant plaintive sound of a fiddle drifting from the tavern. You do not join them. You have your own problems, your own secrets, your own tally of debts and rivalries. You might wish, sometimes, for kinder neighbors, for a street where people mind their own business and leave you to yours. But then you remember, even on the worst days, when the bread burns and the children mock you, it is these same people who would drag you from the ashes if the bakery caught fire, who would lend you a coin or a crust when things were truly dire. Rivals they may be, but you are all bound together by hunger, by hardship, by the endless grinding struggle to survive another day. And tomorrow, as always, the dance will begin again. The city will wake, your rivals will plot, your neighbors will watch, and you will bake because you have no other choice. There is a certain myth about bakers, spread by people who have never set foot behind a bakery door. It goes something like this. Bakers live among the scent of rising dough and golden crust, their homes as warm and clean as a fresh loaf. These people imagine a bakery as a place of comfort, somewhere halfway between a church and a kitchen, and not, as you know all too well, a battleground for cleanliness, one you lose every day. You wake to dust in your nostrils and dirt in your boots. The city is built on filth. It seeps under your door and sifts through your shutters, piling up in corners like a second, grayer harvest. You sweep the floor each morning and again each night, and still the dirt returns, an endless cycle of futility. The neighbor's children run past your step with muddy feet. Chickens peck in the alley and flap their dirty wings, and the wind carries with it everything the city discards: straw, horsehair, the fine white powder of ground bones from the tanneries. There is no keeping it out. You can clean your table, scrub it raw until your knuckles bleed, and by the time you turn to reach for a bowl, a new film of flour and ash has settled, as if the world is determined to remind you of your place in it. It is not just the floor or the table, but every tool you own: the bowls, the paddles, the knife that never holds an edge. Each is worn down by grit, and the sound of stones scraping on wood becomes the music of your mornings. But the real adversaries are the living things, the flies, the cockroaches, the ever present mice. No matter what you do, the flies win. They are there before you start, hovering, watching, landing on the rim of the trough just as you are about to mix in the water. You chase them with your apron, your hand, the old willow switch kept for this very purpose. Some mornings you even mutter a few words of prayer, but it turns out flies do not care for religion. They come in waves, more in summer, fewer in winter, but never truly gone. They find every crumb you drop, every spot of dough, every splash of water. Sometimes you hear them before you see them, a low, droning whine, a kind of insect chorus. They crawl on your arms and face, tickle your ears, land on the bread as it cools, and sometimes, when you are tired enough, not even that will move you to shoo them away. The cockroaches are worse. You see them only at the edges of things. A quick skitter under the cupboard when you lift a sack of flour, the rustle of antenna when you reach for the jar of salt. You kill what you can, but for every one you crush, two more appear the next day, bolder than before. The neighbors talk about ways to drive them out: ash, vinegar, even spells muttered by the old woman who lives near the well. None of it works for long. And then there are the mice. The cats in the alley do their best, but even they cannot keep up. You hear the mice at night, gnawing at the corners of the grain sack, scurrying through the rafters, their tiny feet a constant reminder that nothing here belongs to you for long. Sometimes you catch one, usually too late, after it has already chewed its way through the best of your stores. You think about the legends of other cities where mice are eaten as delicacies, and you wonder, some nights, whether you are desperate enough to try. It is not just the animals. The very air seems determined to betray you. In the mornings, the bakery is choked with dust kicked up by the traffic outside: horses, carts, the endless tramping of boots. In summer, the windows must be kept open or you will suffocate from the heat of the oven. In winter, you close them and choke instead on the smoke. Each choice comes with its own flavor of misery. You have learned a kind of grim acceptance. You try to keep the bread off the floor. Try to sweep 3 times instead of 2. Try to keep the worst of the flies away from the dough. You line up your loaves on the rack, knowing that by afternoon the bottom row will be crawling with ants or covered in a light dusting of dirt. There are days when you envy the butchers and the brewers. At least their enemies cannot fly. The customers, of course, notice everything. They complain about the flies, accuse you of filth, threaten to tell the inspector. You want to invite them to watch you sweep the same patch of floor for the 10th time in a day, to show them the scar on your palm from the last time you slipped on a patch of spilled lard. But you know it would not matter. In this city, blame is a kind of currency, and everyone spends it freely. You remember once hearing a story from a traveler about a bakery in a far off city, spotless, shining, with loaves so perfect they looked like jewels. You suspect the story is a lie. Here, perfection is for the rich, and cleanliness is for the lucky. The rest of you do what you can and hope the bread comes out well enough that no one notices the rest. Still, sometimes, when you find a moment between the endless sweeping and swatting, you let yourself dream of what it would be like to make bread in a place where the air is clean and the only thing to worry about is the rise of the dough. But the dream never lasts. There is always another mouse to chase, another cockroach to stomp, another cloud of flour dust to cough from your lungs. You sweep the floor again, watch the dust settle, and know it will all be back before the sun sets. In this city, dirt is eternal, and flies are forever. You would think that, in a city where the water is muddy, the streets are packed with refuse, and the neighbors think nothing of sharing their stew with the local rat population. Bread would be the last thing anyone cares to inspect. But you would be wrong. If there is one thing more consistent than the sunrise, it is the city's appetite for rules. Every loaf you pull from the oven, every roll, every rough-hewn round must be ready for inspection by people whose own hands have never known the sting of a flour burn. It begins with the morning bell, a low, dull clang that signals not only the opening of the market, but also the arrival of the city's bread inspector. He is a man whose shoes are always clean and whose smile is always thin. Sometimes, if you are unlucky, he brings an apprentice, eager to prove himself by finding faults you never imagined. Their approach is as predictable as it is ominous. A slow, deliberate walk, the city's ledger tucked under one arm, a notched stick for measuring bread under the other. You watch him come down the lane, eyes narrow, every muscle in your back tensed. The loaves cool on the shelf behind you, some too dark, some too pale, a few with suspicious lumps where the dough did not rise, and one or two that you would rather feed to the pigs than risk offering for sale. You know which ones he will pick. It is never the best or the worst, but always the one you are most worried about. Good morning, he says, and you wonder if he even tastes the irony in his voice. He does not wait for your reply, but instead goes straight to the bread, running his fingers along the crust as if reading some secret code. He picks up a loaf, weighing it in his hand. Sometimes he sniffs it. Sometimes he even breaks one in half. Right there in front of your customers, the crumbs spilling out like the last of your pride. He checks for weight and for size, though the city's official measure changes as often as the mayor's mind. Too small, and you are fined. Too large, and you are accused of cheating your fellow bakers by giving away more than your share. Too dark, and you are warned about burning your bread. Too pale, and you are told your oven is too cold, a hazard to public health. You have a growing collection of parchment warnings tacked above your work table, a collage of failure in 3 languages and a variety of threatening scripts. Sometimes the inspector asks questions. What's in this loaf? He'll say, eyes sharp. You recite the answer you have rehearsed: wheat flour, water, a little salt, nothing else. You do not mention the handful of barley, the scrap of yesterday's dough, the desperate pinch of peas or acorn flour that padded out the sack. You keep your face blank. If he suspects, he says nothing. If he knows, he is waiting for you to slip up in some other way. The customers are never far away. Some hang back, pretending to browse while really hoping to see you shamed. Others, especially your rivals, linger just out of sight, waiting to carry news of your latest failure back to their own shops. You know there is no kindness in this street. Today's misfortune is tomorrow's gossip, and bread inspection day is a holiday for those who prefer laughter to labor. There are bribes, of course. You have given them half a loaf here, a hot roll there, a promise to set aside the first crust for his supper. It is a dangerous game, for the city has as many informers as inspectors. If the wrong person sees you slip a loaf into the wrong hands, the price you pay will be more than just a few coppers. But sometimes a bribe is the only way to make the numbers add up, to survive another week. Then there are the accusations. A neighbor claims your bread made his daughter ill. A customer swears she found a nail in her loaf. The inspector does not care about the truth, only the performance. You apologize, offer another loaf, never quite as fresh, never quite as large. You add her name to the growing list of those who owe you something, even if it is only silence. You wonder sometimes if anyone in the city has ever eaten a perfect loaf. Once, when you were new, you tried to defend yourself. You explained about the flour, the water, the fire, the endless struggle, just to keep the dough from molding before it even reached the oven. The inspector shrugged. Not my concern, he said. The rules are clear. Bread is bread. Since then, you have learned to say nothing. Sometimes the inspector comes when the oven is empty. You stand to glare in the silence, listening to the tick of the cooling stones, waiting for him to find fault in something you have not even made yet. He always does. The window is dirty, he says. The scales are crooked. Your apron is stained. As if any of these things matter to people who are only ever one bad harvest away from hunger. When he finally leaves, you exhale, slow, careful, so no one sees the relief. The customers shuffle forward, some eyeing the bread as if it might bite. Others, emboldened by the inspection, demand a lower price, a bigger loaf, a promise that tomorrow will be better. You give what you must. You cannot afford to lose even the poorest customer. In the quiet that follows, you look at your shelves. Some loaves will have to be thrown out, too small, too misshapen, too full of holes to pass the next inspection. The waste is a pain you cannot speak about. You think about feeding the scraps to the rats, but they do well enough without your help. At the end of the day, you gather the warning notes and stack them on the pile. You sweep the crumbs into a corner where the flies wait, and you wonder how long you can keep up the pretense. Quality is a word for people who do not go hungry. Here you measure success in days survived, fines avoided, bread sold before it goes moldy. You sleep with the fear that come morning, the rules will have changed again, and you will wake up to a new list of failures. This is the burden of quality, not the bread, but the eyes that watch it, judge it, and find it wanting. The first customers of the day are never the rich. You know this before you even open the shutter. The rich send servants, boys with empty baskets and downturned eyes, girls clutching embroidered purses as if the air itself might snatch them away. They come later, after the dust has settled, when the best bread is set aside and the streets are safer. No, your earliest and most frequent visitors are the city's poor, the ones who cannot wait, the ones who have nothing to lose but their patience, and nothing to trade but their hunger. The poor do not enter your bakery as much as seep into it, one by one, or in small clusters, bringing with them the cold from the street and a certain desperation that settles in the air heavier than the morning fog. Their faces are familiar, lined and hollow, eyes darting, hands chapped and blackened from work or cold or both. You know their stories, sometimes because they tell you, but more often because you have lived them yourself. Some are regulars. Old Anya, who wears her husband's coat and shuffles in with the same faded basket every morning. She counts her coins on the counter, never quite enough, always the same performance of sighs and apologies, the same hopeful glance at your face as if you might forget, just this once, that bread costs money. You usually slip her an extra crust. It is not kindness exactly, just a form of surrender. There is Grigor, who works at the tannery and smells like the inside of a boot. He arrives at dawn with mud up to his knees, asks for the cheapest loaf, then tries to haggle down the price with a story about his wife's illness, his mother's bad leg, his own rotten teeth. You listen without comment, hand him the loaf, watch him tuck it under his arm, and vanish before you can remember if he paid at all. Some days you find a copper left on the windowsill, some days nothing. Children are the boldest. They swarm around the door, eyes bright, fingers sticky with someone else's jam or their own snot. The older ones barter with you. A crust for sweeping your step, a roll for carrying a message. The younger ones do not bother. They watch for the moment when your back is turned, then dart in, snatch the first thing they can reach, and vanish into the street. You chase them for show, but never very far. You know who is truly hungry and who is just clever. Sometimes it is not even bread they want, but a place to rest, a moment's warmth. They linger in your shop, hovering near the oven, soaking in the heat that costs you so much an effort and so much wood. Some offer gossip, news from the other end of the street. Most just sit in silence, staring at their feet, as if they might turn into loaves if they wish hard enough. The poor do not ask for much, but they ask often. Bread in the morning, bread at midday, bread again before the shop closes. Always on credit, always with a promise, always with a reason why today is the day you should trust them. Sometimes they even repay you. Most times they do not. You keep a ledger, if only to remind yourself how many debts you will never collect. There are days when you resent them, these endless hands and empty mouths. You wonder what it would be like to sell only to those who pay full price, to sweep your doorstep free of the desperate and the dirty, to close the shutter as soon as the bread is gone. But you know the truth. Without the poor, you would have no customers at all. The rich buy bread, but not from you, not unless every other option has failed. Your shop is for the hungry, the hopeless, the ones who do not mind if there is a little more barley and a little less wheat in the dough. Sometimes, in the late afternoon, you walk the market street and see the other bakers, Janek with his polished sign and whiter loaves, the old woman 3 doors down, who bakes only for the merchant's house. Their customers are clean, well dressed, and silent. You watch them count their coins, frown at the smallest crack in a crust, turn up their noses at a loaf that is not perfectly round. You do not envy them exactly. You know they have their own problems. Inspectors, rivals, the endless threat of some rich man's displeasure. Still, you wonder what it would be like to sell bread that people actually want, instead of bread that people simply need. The poor do not have the luxury of taste. They take what you offer, grumble a little, and eat it anyway. On the worst days, when the flour is half dust and the oven burns too cold, they are grateful for even the smallest scrap. They thank you with nods, with hurried blessings, with a silence that says more than words ever could. Some days, that is enough. Most days, it is not. You think of Anya's empty basket, Grigor's grimy hands, the children's darting feet. You think of the debts that pile up like unsold loaves. You wonder how long it will be before you are the one asking, the one counting coins, the one standing in someone else's doorway with a story and a need. It is not a comforting thought, but it is honest. At the end of the day, when the last loaf is gone and the last promise has been made, you close the shutter and sit for a moment in the quiet. You count your coins, your debts, your regrets. You remind yourself again and again that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow, maybe, someone will pay what they owe. Tomorrow, maybe, someone will bring a story instead of a demand. Tomorrow, maybe, the bread will be enough. But for tonight, you sit in the dim light, listening to the sounds of the city, the laughter, the shouts, the distant cry of someone else's hunger, and you know that, come morning, the poor will be at your door again, and you will open it because you have no other choice. If you ever want to test the strength of your nerves, try baking bread for the wealthy. The poor will eat what you give them, so long as it is filling and does not kill them too quickly. The wealthy, on the other hand, are connoisseurs of complaint. Their coins are real, their shoes are polished, and their needs are as numerous as the rules by which you are measured and found wanting. You know when a wealthy customer is coming long before they appear in your doorway. The street grows quieter, as if the city itself knows to hush. The neighbors stop to stare. Someone sends a child running ahead. The merchant's man is on his way, or the priest wants a special loaf today. You wipe your hands on the least filthy part of your apron and hope the best loaves are still warm. There is no time to hide the cracks in the wall or sweep away the mice droppings, but you try anyway, as if a clean doorstep will fool anyone born with a silver spoon. When the door swings open, it is never the Lord or the merchant himself, but always a servant. A young woman with pinched lips and a bundle of lace at her throat, or a boy in a too large coat, staring straight ahead and careful not to touch anything. Their eyes slide over the racks, over your hands, over the bread itself, and you feel as if your entire life is being measured, weighed, and found lacking. The requests are never simple. Father Tomas needs a white loaf for the bishop's table, not too dark, not too heavy, and no seeds this time. Last time the bishop nearly choked, or the magistrate's wife has guests. Can you make your rolls a little rounder, a little lighter? You nod, of course, promising the impossible, knowing that the flour is gray, the oven unreliable, and your patience stretched thinner than the dough you shape by candlelight. You tell yourself you will find a way. You always do. You save the best flour for these loaves, the handful at the bottom of the sack, untouched by weevils, slightly less sour than the rest. You pick out the largest grains of salt, the cleanest water, the least burnt pieces of wood for the oven. You shape the dough carefully, pressing out every crack, every lump, whispering apologies to the saints for every corner you have to cut. If the bread comes out right, you will eat the scraps. If it comes out wrong, you will eat the complaints. The wealthy have time to inspect their bread. They poke it, prod it, hold it up to the light. They sniff the crust and break the loaf in half, letting the crumb tumble out like a secret. They are experts in disappointment. Too much salt, not enough air, crust too dark, crumb too tight, shape not pleasing to the eye. You stand by, sweating under their gaze, watching your day's work dismantled by hands that have never lifted a bag of flour or cleaned the ashes from an oven. Sometimes the servant will sigh and say, "This will have to do," as if granting you a favor. Sometimes they will smile, thin and cold, and promise that payment will be sent tomorrow. You know what that means. It means a wait of days, weeks, sometimes forever, until you are forced to go yourself, hat in hand, to beg for what you are owed. And there, in the marble hall or the tiled kitchen, you will be greeted by a new servant, a new excuse, a new humiliation. The master is busy. The lady is not receiving visitors. We have paid already, have we not? You keep a list of these debts. It grows longer every year. Some you collect with luck and persistence, others you never see again. But you keep trying because one good order, one special loaf for the feast or the christening or the bishop's table can make up for a week of losses from the poor. Or so you tell yourself, though the math never quite adds up. Once in a while, a wealthy patron comes in person. The priest, in his fine black robe, nodding to your neighbors as if blessing the street itself. The merchant, smelling of musk and oranges, his fingers heavy with rings. They do not touch the bread. Why would they? They describe what they want in exquisite, impossible detail. A bread like the one I had in Florence, shaped like a crown, flecked with honey and orange peel. A loaf for my mother's table, soft as a pillow, white as snow, baked on a stone, warm by rosemary and thyme. You smile and nod, promising miracles, your mind already racing through the cupboard for anything that might pass as orange peel, anything that could be traded for a sprig of rosemary. You wonder if these people have ever gone hungry, if they have ever eaten bread that was more sawdust than wheat, chewed for the sake of filling a belly rather than delighting the tongue. You doubt it. Their complaints are a luxury, their taste a form of power. To them, bread is not survival, but art. Still, there are moments when the wealthy are generous. A few coins slipped across the counter, a word of thanks, a nod that says, "Just for a moment, you are seen." On feast days, when the loaves come out right and the rolls are plump, they send a basket back, or a ribbon, or a sliver of cheese from the kitchen. These gifts do not last, but they are remembered. The worst are the city officials, inspectors, stewards, men with soft hands and hard eyes. They do not ask for bread, they demand it. The magistrate will take 6 loaves for the council meeting, deliver them before sunset. No payment until the council is satisfied. You swallow your protest, gather your best bread, and walk through the city with a basket on your hip, bracing yourself for the guard at the door and the suspicion in every glance. You return to your shop, poorer in bread, no richer in coin, but with your reputation intact, at least for today. In this business, reputation is a brittle thing, always on the verge of cracking. At night, you think about those loaves cooling on fine plates, being torn by well fed hands, picked over and left for the dogs. You wonder what it would be like to eat as they do, to complain for sport instead of necessity. But you know that in the morning, when the shutters open and the city stirs, it will be the poor who stand in your doorway once again. For all their wealth, the rich do not keep your bakery alive. They do not wait in the cold or haggle over the price of a crust. They come and go, leaving coins and complaints in their wake. The poor are your bread and butter, the wealthy only the icing, rare, sweet, and gone before you can taste it. And so you save your best flour, shape your prettiest loaves, and wait for the next knock on the door, never sure if it will bring fortune or another empty promise. You would think, being surrounded by bread all day, that bakers would eat well. This is a lie told by those who have never worked a dough sticky hour or watched the last loaf walk out the door in someone else's hands. Your meals are an afterthought, squeezed into the minutes between baking and selling, cleaning and worrying. You eat not what you choose, but what remains. And what remains is rarely enough. The day's first meal is always the crust from yesterday's bread, tough and curling at the edges, the color of old bone, and about as appetizing. Sometimes it is hard enough to break a tooth. Other times it is spotted with blue-green mold, and you scrape it off with a knife, telling yourself that a little bit of rot is a small price to pay for a full stomach. You chew and swallow, ignoring the taste, the texture, the guilt. You know you will be hungrier later. If you are lucky, there will be a scrap of cheese to go with it, a wedge so sharp and aged it bites back, or so bland it might as well be chalk. Cheese, like everything else, goes quickly. You barter for it with crusts, with promises, with the quiet understanding that tomorrow it will be gone and you will be back to bread alone. Lunch comes when it can, sometimes not at all. It is what you can steal from the day's batch before the first customer arrives. A misshapen heel, a roll that burned on one side, a hunk of dough that never quite rose. Sometimes you soak it in the thinnest broth, a liquid earned by boiling yesterday's bones and today's regrets. The pot sits at the edge of the hearth, collecting whatever scraps you can hide from the customers and the cats. Onion skins, carrot tops, a bone that the butcher's boy dropped on his way to the stew pot. You ladle it out with a cracked spoon, tasting more smoke than flavor. If there is meat, it is never enough and always a surprise. a strip of gristle from the butcher, a sliver of dried fish bought cheap at the end of market day. On feast days, maybe a bit of sausage, but only if you have done well or if a neighbor owes you a favor. Otherwise, you watch the cats and hope for luck. You never eat hot bread. That goes to the customers, to the city officials, to anyone with enough coin to buy a loaf while it still steams. By the time you sit down, the bread is cold, the crust as tough as your hands, the crumb dried out and shrunken. You gnaw it anyway, licking the salt from your fingers, trying not to think of all the bread you have made and never tasted at its best. Sometimes, if there are no customers and no one watching, you sneak a piece of dough before it bakes. You tell yourself it is to test the salt, but you know the truth. Raw dough is a vice, a secret snack, a last resort. You hide the habit from the neighbors, from the children who would laugh, from yourself. Dinner, if it comes, is a repeat of lunch and breakfast. Another crust, another bowl of broth, another wedge of hope. The leftovers pile up in a corner, scraps you will turn into tomorrow's meal if they do not go moldy first. Nothing is wasted, not if you can help it. Stale bread becomes soup, soup becomes porridge, porridge becomes the base for tomorrow's dough. Hunger is inventive, and you have learned all its tricks. On days when the oven has been good and the customers generous, you may find yourself with a little extra. Then you share a crust for the rag picker, a bite for the washerwoman's child, a piece for the dog that guards your door. These are not acts of charity, they are investments, bargains struck against the day when you will be the one with your hand outstretched. In this city, generosity is currency, and everyone keeps careful accounts. There are times when you wonder what it would be like to eat as your customers imagine you do. Warm loaves, fresh from the oven, spread with butter and honey, washed down with ale. You dream of feasts, tables heavy with bread and meat, laughter in the air, the comfort of eating until you are full. But dreams are for the rich and the foolish. In the real world, you chew another crust and wash it down with water as gray as the sky. Sometimes a neighbor will share a meal. You gather around a chipped table, a handful of crusts in the middle, maybe a jug of weak beer if someone has had a good day. The talk is slow, the laughter tired, but for a moment you forget how thin the soup is, how stale the bread. You remember what it feels like to be more than a baker, more than a stomach waiting to be filled. When night comes and you count your coins and your loaves, you make a note of what is left. You save a little for breakfast, tuck the rest away from the mice, and hope that tomorrow's dough will stretch further. You dream of the harvest, of the miller bringing fresh flour, of a day when you can eat without counting, chew without worrying. But when you wake, there is only the crust, the cold, and the memory of a hunger that never quite leaves. This is your daily bread, not the promise of plenty, but the skill of survival. And in this city, survival is a meal you learn to savor, even when it tastes of little more than yesterday's sorrow. Rest, for you, is something that happens in moments, never hours, rarely even full minutes. It is more of an interruption than a luxury, a truce called with your aching bones and heavy eyelids before the world resumes its assault. You tell yourself you will sleep when the dough is rising, or when the last loaf has cooled, or when the shutters are drawn and the city outside finally falls silent. These are lies. The truth is that rest is always borrowed, and the debt comes due at the worst possible times. After a night spent half awake, listening to the distant wailing of someone else's misery, the scuttle of mice in the rafters, and the constant throb in your own shoulders, you stagger through the morning on habit and hope alone. Your bed is a sack of straw so old it smells of the harvest 3 summers ago, and in every time you lie down, it collapses a little further under your weight. You dream, if you dream at all, of work, of kneading dough that never comes together, of customers who pay only in curses. Even when you find a scrap of time to close your eyes, true sleep eludes you. The aches in your hands, the stiffness in your back, the pounding behind your eyes, they all keep you half present, as if your body is afraid to let you slip too far away from the day's worries. Your sleep is shallow, crowded with nightmares of fire, theft, or the city guards demanding bread you do not have. Some nights you wake with your fists clenched, your heart racing, certain you've heard someone at the door. Other times, it's only the familiar sound of the neighbor's children fighting or the dog scratching at the walls. But the real enemy is not just exhaustion, it is sickness. Illness does not ask permission. It comes as a cough that never quite leaves, a fever that soaks your shirt and chills your bones, a rash that blooms on your skin like the mold on bad bread. Some days you wake with your throat raw, your head heavy, and you tell yourself it will pass. It rarely does. There are few remedies in your world, and none of them are cheap. The apothecary's door is always open, but his powders and tonics cost more than you earn in a week, and you have seen too many neighbors go in and never come out. Aches and pains become part of your daily routine, counted alongside the sacks of flour and the sticks of firewood. You limp from table to oven, stretch your swollen fingers, ignore the stabbing pain in your side. There is always work to do, and you do it, sickness or not. There are no sick days for a baker, only days when the work is slower, the loaves a little heavier, the complaints a little louder. If you are lucky, the sickness is mild and passes quickly. If not, you pray that no one notices the sweat on your brow, the trembling in your hands, the red in your eyes. Contagion is a fact of life. If someone in the neighborhood coughs, everyone is coughing within a week. Children run fevers. Mothers carry damp cloths and whispered prayers. Sometimes the city sends a doctor, a man with a mask shaped like a bird's beak, reeking of vinegar and authority. He orders the sick to stay inside, but bread still needs baking, and no one is paid to deliver loaves to the dying. More often, the city sends only warnings. Boil your water, air out your rooms, do not gather in crowds. You wonder if anyone in the council has ever tried to make bread without a crowd. When sickness truly takes hold, the city grows quiet and strange. Doors are closed, windows shuttered, the market empties of all but the most desperate. Sometimes you bake for ghosts, leaving loaves on doorsteps for people too weak to answer. Payment, if it comes, is left in a jar or pressed between the slats of the door, coins sticky with fever sweat, notes written in shaky hands. You do not count these days among your good ones, but they are often the ones you remember most. The silent exchange of need and hope, the knowledge that your bread might be the only thing standing between a neighbor and the end. And always there is the question, what happens if you fall ill? There is no one to bake in your place, no apprentice waiting in the wings. If you are lucky, a neighbor will bring you broth or sweep your floor. If not, your shop will close, your debts will mount, and your name will fade from the street as quickly as yesterday's footprints. The city forgets the sick just as it forgets the dead. Rest, when it comes, is never enough. You wake as tired as you were when you lay down, the world no lighter, the aches no less sharp. Sometimes you wonder if you will ever feel well again, if the heaviness in your chest, the ache in your bones, is simply what it means to grow older in this place. You remember a time when you could run, when your hands were quick and sure, when sleep was a thing to be welcomed, not feared. Those days are gone, worn away by years of smoke and dust, hunger and worry. At night, you curl up on your straw bed, pull your thin blanket over your aching limbs, and try to make yourself small. You listen to the city's breath, ragged and uneven, and count the hours until dawn. You promise yourself that tomorrow you will rest, that tomorrow you will eat better, that tomorrow you will feel strong again. But tomorrow is just another day, and the world waits for no one. Not the baker, not the sick, not the tired. All you can do is get up again and again and hope that the bread holds together a little longer than you do. If hunger is your constant companion, then fear is the shadow that walks beside you. It has many faces, sometimes wearing the mask of a customer, sometimes slipping in through the window with a rat's stealth, sometimes roaring down the street with a tongue of fire and a trail of ash. You live every day with the knowledge that everything you own, everything you work for, could be taken in a moment, not by fate, but by the very real, very human hands of thieves and the unpredictable, insatiable appetite of fire. You lock your door at night, though you know it will not stop anyone truly determined. Your lock is a simple thing, a bent piece of iron and a wish. The door itself is soft with age, the wood so dry it splinters when you touch it. Sometimes you lean your back against it as you sleep, as if your own weight might keep the world at bay. In the morning, you inspect the scratches near the latch, the telltale marks of someone testing your defenses. Maybe it was a neighbor, maybe a stranger, maybe just a hungry dog. But you know better than to believe it will be the last attempt. Bread, for all its commonness, is a prize worth stealing. You have seen boys dart in and out like shadows, hands quick and clever, faces blank with the practiced innocence of survival. You chase them, of course, shouting, waving your broom, sometimes throwing a handful of flour for dramatic effect, but rarely catch them. Even when you do, you find you do not have the heart to punish them. You recognize the hunger in their eyes, the sharpness of their ribs under a threadbare shirt. Perhaps the loaf they steal from you is the only thing standing between them and a night of crying themselves to sleep. It is not just children, though. Sometimes, when you count your coins at the end of the day, you find the numbers do not add up. A copper here, a few loaves there, missing without explanation. You suspect the older boys, or maybe that neighbor who lingers too long at your counter, asking questions about your closing hours. Once, you catch a man rifling through your flour sacks, his hands already white up to the elbows. You shout, threaten, wave your rolling pin like a club. He laughs, tells you he thought it was his own bag, then stumbles out into the alley, leaving a trail of dusty footprints and your heart pounding like the tail of a drum. Sometimes the thefts are more organized. You hear stories of gangs, bands of desperate men and women who sweep through the market at dawn, snatching everything not nailed down: bread, chickens, coins, even the very boards from the market stalls. The city guard comes later, swaggering down the street with their clubs and their threats, more interested in the bribes you cannot afford than in catching the real thieves. You pay for their protection with your silence, your fear, and sometimes a loaf or two left on the windowsill. But if thieves are cunning and patient, fire is their opposite: sudden, wild, and merciless. Every baker knows the risk. Your oven, your heart's hearth, is also your greatest danger. A spark caught in dry straw, a coal falling to the floor, a gust of wind through the window at just the wrong moment, and everything can be lost. You have seen it happen to others. The glow in the night, the shouts and screams, the desperate line of neighbors passing buckets hand to hand as flames leap from roof to roof. In the morning, all that remains is blackened stone, smoldering wood, the sharp smell of loss. You keep water near the oven, an old habit, part ritual, part superstition. A cracked jug, a battered bucket, never quite full enough. You sweep the floor every night, check the embers, murmur a prayer to whatever saints might listen. But you know that luck runs thinner than water. One mistake, one moment's inattention, and you could wake to the crackle of fire at your feet, your home and shop swallowed up in heat and smoke. Fire is not always accidental. Sometimes it is a weapon. A rival baker, angry at a lost customer, a merchant, unhappy with yesterday's stale roll, even a spurned lover, their pride burning hotter than any oven. You have heard tales of torches tossed through windows, oil spilled at the door, a match struck in the night. The city is a tinderbox, and everyone knows how quickly a grudge can turn into a funeral pyre. After the threat has passed, thief or fire, you take stock of what remains. You count your loaves, your coins, your curses. You patch the broken door, scrub the soot from the walls, mend the hole in your roof with a piece of old cloth. Each scar tells a story. Here is where the thief climbed in. There is where the flames licked at the window. This is the spot where you wept because you had nothing left to lose. You grow more careful with each passing day, but you never feel safe. The city is always hungry, always watching, always ready to take what you cannot guard. Sometimes you wonder if it is worth it, if the constant fear, the endless repairs, the sleepless nights are the price you must pay for the simple act of baking bread. But you do not stop. You cannot. Bread must be made, thieves must be outwitted, fires must be watched. And so each night you lock your flimsy door, check your fire twice, and pray that, come morning, your world will still be standing. In a world where nothing is certain, ritual is the closest thing you have to safety. Your days, so often dictated by disaster and improvisation, are stitched together by small, stubborn routines, habits passed down through generations, whispered by parents who learned to fear hunger and fire as much as you do. If nothing else, you cling to ritual because it is yours. Even if the world takes everything else, it cannot take the rhythm of your mornings, the order of your chores, the comfort of repeating the same actions day after day. The first ritual is a prayer, not the grand sermons of the cathedral or the self assured blessings of the priest, but a muttered private bargain whispered over the cold hearth. You do not ask for much, just for the dough to rise, for the oven to burn steady, for the rats to keep their distance and the city guard to pass your door. You cross yourself out of habit, not faith, and toss a pinch of flour into the embers as an offering to saints, ancestors, or perhaps to luck itself. If you forget the prayer, your whole day feels off, as if the world is waiting to punish your carelessness. Then comes the sweep, bristles worn thin by years of dirt and flour, always the same tired broom. You move from corner to corner, pushing last night's crumbs and this morning's dust out the door. The neighbors watch, some with amusement, some with envy, some just waiting to see if you uncover anything worth taking. You sweep not because you think the bakery will ever be clean, but because the act itself gives you a moment of control. In a life dictated by chaos, even the illusion of cleanliness is worth something. After the sweep, you set the oven. Every movement is deliberate, every stick of wood arranged just so, every scrap of kindling positioned with the memory of last week's near disaster still hot in your mind. You whisper curses at the logs that refuse to catch and mutter thanks to those that burn bright. Fire, like everything else, demands respect, a daily negotiation that you rarely win but cannot afford to lose. The dough is its own ritual, a quiet, repetitive labor that anchors your mornings. You measure flour by handfuls, not weights, trusting your eye and the way the dust settles on your skin. You knead with a rhythm older than memory, folding and pressing, shaping loaves with the hope that repetition will produce perfection. Some days You sing under your breath old songs that have no words, just sounds to fill the silence and remind you that you are still here. Throughout the day, other rituals thread through your hours. A splash of water on the doorstep to keep the dust down, a scrap of bread tossed to the alley's stray cat for luck. If the bread burns, you save the crust for the rag picker. No sense in tempting fate twice. When a child brings you news or gossip, you give them a heel of bread and a warning to keep their voice down. In the afternoon, you count your coins, always twice, sometimes three times, just in case a miracle has slipped in among the copper. When the church bells ring, you pause, out of habit, if not piety. For a moment, the whole street goes quiet, each person marking the hour in their own way. Some cross themselves, some spit, some just count the chimes and return to their work. You take the opportunity to look at your shelves, to judge how much bread remains, to decide whether you can afford to set some aside for the old woman down the street who always pays late but always pays. Evening brings its own set of rituals. The bread that is not sold is wrapped and stored, hidden from mice and neighbors alike. You sweep again, though you know the dirt will be back by dawn. You check the door, the shutters, the tiny hoard of coins hidden in a crack by the hearth. You count your debts in your head and say another prayer, not for wealth, but for another day. You tell yourself you will rest, that tonight you will sleep, that tomorrow will be easier. These are lies, but they are necessary. Some rituals are shared. On holy days, you bring a loaf to the church, hardly charity, but a small price to keep the priest from turning your customers against you. When a neighbor suffers a loss, you send a crust or a roll, a silent token of solidarity. When a birth is celebrated, you shape the dough into a crude plate and leave it at their door before sunrise. These small gestures keep the peace, maintain the balance, ensure that when your own disaster comes, you will not face it alone. There are darker rituals too. When the city is tense after a theft, a fire, or a visit from the inspectors, you burn a sprig of dried herb in the oven just in case. You sweep the threshold backward to confuse bad luck, scatter salt at the corners to keep evil at bay. You know these acts are superstition, but you do them anyway, because in a world where so much is uncertain, even superstition has its uses. At the end of the day, you sit at your table, cup in hand, staring at the last crust of bread. The city outside is noisy, restless, full of danger. Inside, you are held together by your rituals, thin, fragile threads that keep you moving forward. You whisper your last prayer to the darkness, tuck your coins away, and close your eyes. If you are lucky, the world will leave you be until morning. If not, at least you will meet it with the comfort of routine. Ritual is not about hope. It is about survival, about making the unbearable just a little more bearable, about finding shape in the shapeless. In this city, routine is the closest thing you have to peace, and peace, like bread, is never wasted. There are days when you think the sun never truly rises over your street. The world of the baker is one of shadows. Long before the first rays creep over the rooftops, you are already at work by the glow of embers and, if you are lucky, a half spent candle. Light, like everything else here, is measured, rationed, and never quite enough. It is not simply the absence of darkness, but a presence to be guarded, purchased, and sometimes begged for. Candles are precious, more precious than salt or even bread. You keep a stub of tallow by the hearth for emergencies, watching the wick shrink lower with every use, calculating whether you can afford another before week's end. Sometimes, when a loaf sells well or an inspector forgets to fine you, you treat yourself to a new candle, thick and clumsy, its light smelling of sheep fat and smoke. It fills the bakery with a dull yellow haze, casting every crack and flaw into harsh relief. But most nights you work with less. The fire in the oven provides some light, but it is fickle, a sullen red glow that shifts and flickers, illuminating only what you least want to see: the stains on the floor, the cobwebs in the rafters, the dust settling in the corners. The rest of the bakery remains shrouded in gloom, every shape ambiguous, every movement uncertain. Your eyes adjust, but your mind never quite does. You stumble over your own feet, knock over your tools, curse the darkness, and carry on. Light, when it comes, is always accompanied by shadows. You see yourself doubled and tripled across the walls, thin, hunched, more ghost than human. In the early hours, you glimpse your reflection in the window, a face drawn and hollow, eyes ringed with fatigue, skin streaked with flour and soot. The city outside is little better, lanterns guttering on their posts, shop signs half visible, figures moving like dreams along the alleyways. In darkness, everyone is equal, poor, rich, honest, or otherwise. The absence of light is more than inconvenience, it is danger. A misplaced foot, a trip on a loose board, and you could burn yourself, or worse. The city's rats and thieves thrive in the dark, slipping through the cracks in your door, searching for crumbs and coins. You grow used to keeping a stick by your bed, just in case a noise in the night is not a mouse, but a man. Sometimes you light your candle not for the work, but for the illusion of safety, the pretense that a thin circle of yellow can keep the world at bay. You remember, sometimes, stories of places where light is abundant, festivals where lamps hang from every doorway, where colored lanterns bob in the breeze and the streets shine like day. You have never seen such a thing. Here, even at midsummer, the light is stingy, the shadows thick. You make do. You learn to see by the glow of the oven, to count the minutes by the lengthening shade, to ration your candles as you ration your flour. The darkness is not without its uses. It hides your poverty, veils the cracks in the wall and the threadbare state of your clothes. It makes every loaf look a little better, every coin a little shinier. It gives you privacy in a world that insists on knowing your business. In the gloom, your failures are less visible, your exhaustion less obvious. Some secrets are easier to keep in the dark. Still, you resent it, the way it clings to your back, pools under your eyes, follows you into every corner. You imagine that somewhere there are bakers who work in well lit rooms, who read by lamp, who do not wake in every morning with their skin crusted in soot and their eyes stinging from the effort of squinting into shadow. You know, of course, that even in those places, darkness finds a way in, but it is easier to blame the light for your troubles than to admit that hardship is everywhere. When morning finally comes, it is never as bright as you hope. The sun rises behind the city's smoke, painting everything in gray and brown. The bakery fills with a dim, cold light, just strong enough to show you how much cleaning remains, how many crumbs you missed the night before. You open the shutters, let in the air and the weak rays, and begin again. In the evenings, you ration your remaining light carefully. One candle for the work table, another for the cupboard where you count your coins. You let the oven die down, watching the embers fade to black. You move slowly, saving every stub of candle, every piece of kindling for the nights to come. Sometimes, when you are feeling brave or foolish, you sit by the window and watch the city lights, patchy, uneven, a constellation of lives as uncertain as your own. And when the darkness finally wins, when you can no longer see your hands or the bread on your table, you give in. You sit in silence, listening to the city's breathing, and try to remember that darkness is only the absence of light, not its enemy. In a world where both are rare and fleeting, you learn to value each for what it is, a fleeting companion, a reminder of how much and how little separates you from everyone else. As the sun slips behind the rooftops and the city's noise turns from the shouts of barter to the murmur of homecomings, your day is still far from over. For the baker, evening is not a time of rest, but a final, grinding hour when the last crumbs of energy are spent in the service of survival. You may have sold your last loaf, shooed away your last customer, but there is always more to do before the day can truly be called done. You begin, as always, with the leftovers. You sort through the racks, searching for anything still edible, a half burnt crust, a roll too dense for even the rats. These you tuck away for tomorrow's breakfast, or perhaps to trade with the neighbor's dog for an hour's peace from barking. Anything moldy is thrown out the window for the pigeons and the children to squabble over. There is no such thing as waste in your world, but there are limits to even your stomach's courage. Next comes the cleaning. You sweep the floor again, although you know it will be filthy by morning. The broom bristles are worn to nubs. You make a mental note to ask the carpenter for another, though you know the price will be steep and you will have to pay in bread, not coin. You wipe down the work table, scrape the dried dough from the trough, pick the last crumbs from the corners. Each motion is slow, deliberate, the weight of fatigue pressing down on your arms until even the thought of bending to tie your shoes seems Herculean. You check the fire, make sure the embers are dying properly, and scatter a few drops of water to keep any lingering sparks from growing into disaster. You run your hands over the oven's stones, feeling for cracks or chips. Every imperfection is a future threat, a place for heat to leak away, for smoke to gather, for next week's loaves to burn on one side and stay raw on the other. You make another mental note, add it to the list of things you will fix when there is time. There is never time. You count the day's coins, such as they are, and set them in a little pile on the table. Coppers and a few dull silvers, never enough, always less than you hoped. You try to remember who still owes you for yesterday's bread, who paid with a promise or a blessing, who slipped away while your back was turned. You add their names to the ledger, already stained and fraying at the edges, the ink running thin where you have written and rewritten the same debts 100 times. It is a ritual almost as old as baking itself, the nightly tally of what you have earned and what you have lost. You review your supplies, the dwindling stack of firewood, the ever shrinking bag of flour, the bottle of oil down to its last stubborn dregs. You think of what you must buy tomorrow and with what. You think of what you can put off, what you can repair yourself, what you can beg or barter for among the other shopkeepers. There are no easy choices. Each night you gamble that you can make it through another day, another inspection, another week without disaster. Sometimes you discover damage, something broken, something missing. A window cracked by a careless child's stone, a sack of flour gnawed open by mice, a tool gone from its hook, borrowed by a neighbor who will never return it. Each loss is a small wound, another reason to clench your teeth and tighten your belt. You tell yourself you will be more careful tomorrow. You tell yourself you will trust less, lock up more, watch the door, watch the shadows, watch your own hands. When the cleaning is finished, you sit at your table, exhausted. The bread has all been sold or stored, the coins counted, the floor swept, the fire banked. But rest does not come easily. Your mind is too busy with numbers, loaves baked and sold, debts owed and owed to you, the days until the next delivery of flour, the hours until you must wake again. The city outside is quieting, but inside your head, the tally continues. Sometimes you eat a last crust of bread, not out of hunger, but out of habit, chewing slowly in the gloom. Sometimes you allow yourself a cup of thin beer or a mouthful of weak broth. Most nights, you simply stare at the candle, watching it gutter lower and lower, knowing that you cannot afford another if this one goes out before you are ready for sleep. You think of all you have endured, the long hours, the angry customers, the inspectors and thieves, the endless struggle to keep just one step ahead of disaster. You wonder, as you do every night, if you will ever have enough money, enough food, enough time to rest. You doubt it, but you hope anyway. Hope, after all, is cheaper than flour. As you finally climb to your straw bed, every bone in your body protests. You close your eyes, feeling the ache in your hands, the stiffness in your back, the weariness that seeps down to your soul. You drift towards sleep, not with dreams, but with calculations. How many loaves for how many coins? How many days until the landlord comes calling? How many mornings left before something breaks for good? The darkness settles in, heavy and familiar. The city is at peace for now, and you too are at rest, at least until the next day's cost must be counted all over again. The night is thick, heavy, and endless. Your body aches with exhaustion, but your mind is busy with dreams, dreams that slip between fantasy and fear, blurring the line until you cannot tell one from the other. Rest comes in scraps, fitful and interrupted, always perched on the edge of waking. Even in sleep, the burdens of the day follow you, each worry climbing into bed beside you, curling close like a shivering cat. Sometimes, in your dreams, you are somewhere else, a village you hardly remember, a field bright with harvest, a table crowded with food and laughter. The bread is soft, still warm from the oven, and you eat until your belly aches. No one knocks on your door, no one counts your coins. The neighbors are friendly, the children clean and laughing, the oven always hot, the dough always rising. The city is far away, a shadow you do not even recognize. But the dream never lasts. You wake, half choking, to the reality of your own cold room, to the scratch of straw on your cheek, to the sound of mice fighting over a crumb beneath your bed. The warmth of your imagined feast dissolves, leaving only hunger in its place. You turn over, trying to catch a little more sleep before the morning bell, but the weight of your fears pulls you back from even the gentlest rest. Fear is a constant. You fear running out of flour before the week is done. Fear the oven will fail you at just the wrong moment. Fear the next customer will bring not coins, but complaints. You fear thieves in the night and fire in the walls. Sickness that will sap your strength until you cannot lift even a loaf, let alone the day's burden. Some fears are old friends, so familiar you do not even notice their presence. Others creep in at the edges, sharp and sudden, a new pain in your side or an unfamiliar cough that refuses to fade. You fear the city's officials, inspectors, tax collectors, the faceless men who decide if you will be fined or ruined or simply forgotten. Their rules change as often as the wind, and you are always at risk of falling afoul of some new decree, some fresh demand. You dream sometimes of the magistrate's court, of standing accused before a crowd of sneering faces, your bread held up as evidence of your failure. The sentence is always the same: poverty, shame, exile. You wake with the echo of their laughter ringing in your ears. You fear the loss of those few small things you have managed to keep. The old wooden spoon passed down from your mother, the ragged blanket that once belonged to your father, the chipped cup that holds your nightly ration of beer. You fear that someday even these tokens will be gone, lost to fire or theft, or the relentless decay that eats at everything in this city. Worst of all, you fear being forgotten. You wonder if, when you are gone, anyone will remember your name, your bread, the years you spent turning flour and water into the daily sustenance of your neighbors. You think of the other bakers who have come and gone, their shops now boarded up or repurposed, their stories vanished, except for a few whispered tales told by the oldest among you. Will anyone remember the baker who gave an extra crust to a hungry child, who swept the step every morning, who fought back the rats and the darkness for one more day? Or will you too be swallowed by the city, just another anonymous soul lost to time? There are days when your fears overpower you, when you lie awake long after the fire has died, counting every possible disaster. You try to steel yourself to remember that fear is a kind of payment, the price you pay for survival, for hope, for another chance. But some nights it is almost too much. You bury your face in your arms and listen to the distant sounds of the city, a baby crying, a dog barking, the whistle of the wind through the cracks in your door. You remind yourself that everyone is afraid, even those who pretend otherwise. In a world where so much can go wrong, fear is the only constant, the only thing that truly belongs to you. Yet, amid all the dread, there are moments so small, so rare, that you almost dare to hope. A loaf that rises just right, a customer who pays what they owe, a neighbor who stops by with a smile or a story. In these fleeting instants, your dreams flicker back to life, stubborn and bright. You imagine a future less burdened, a day when you might rest without worry, a world where bread is plentiful and no one goes hungry. You know these dreams are foolish. You know, too, that they are necessary. They are what push you out of bed each morning, what keeps your hands working and your heart beating. Without them, you would be nothing more than a shadow in the darkness, as easily lost as a crumb beneath the table. As morning approaches, you gather your dreams and your fears and rise once more. The day will bring its usual miseries, its usual tiny triumphs. You will face them all, as you always do, with more hope than you admit and more fear than you show. This is the life of the baker, a constant balancing act between nightmares and longing, a daily struggle to keep going, to keep baking, to keep believing that one day things might be better. There is a silence in the hour before dawn, a space so thin you could slip through it if only you knew how. It is not quite night, not yet morning, but the moment when one day's dirt and exhaustion harden into the shape of the next. You lie awake, staring at the cracked beams above your head, the gray light seeping in through the shutter. Your body aches. Of course it does, but it is a familiar ache, one you greet like an old acquaintance. It means you survived another day. It means, for now, you still have a place in this world. You rise before the sun because you must. The city is still half asleep, the streets muffled and empty, but your mind is already cataloging the work ahead, the ashes in the oven, the bucket that needs filling, the dwindling sack of flour that will somehow have to stretch for another day. You swing your feet to the floor, feeling the cold seep up through your bones, and you stand, not because you want to, but because there is no alternative. The rituals begin again, the same movements, the same muttered prayers, the same small, necessary gestures that hold your world together. You sweep the floor, push aside the crumbs from yesterday's bread, set the kettle to boil if there is enough water left. You check the door, the coins, the scraps set aside for breakfast. Each task is a thread in the fabric of survival, and you dare not let any one of them unravel. As the first gray light creeps into the shop, you listen to the sounds of your neighbors stirring. A cough from the carpenter's room, the clatter of a pail at the well, a baby's wail echoing down the alley. You know them all by heart, the symphony of other people's misery. You are not alone in your struggles, but the knowledge brings little comfort. Misery is always crowded. The day marches forward, indifferent and unchanging. You knead the dough, shape the loaves, feed the fire. Your hands move with the muscle memory of countless mornings. Press, fold, turn, repeat. The dough is sticky, then smooth, then sticky again. Some days it rises beautifully, others it sulks and sours, refusing to cooperate. You mutter at it, cajole it, threaten and beg. The dough, like the day, has its own moods. The bakery fills with the smells you know so well: smoke and yeast, sweat and damp, a faint trace of hope if you let yourself imagine it. Customers come and go, leaving behind coins and complaints, stories and silences. The poor bargain and plead, the rich sneer and pay late. The children sneak and snatch when they think you are not looking. You give what you must, hold back what you can, and always, always keep a careful count. Outside, the city breathes and sweats, haggles and weeps. The guards pass by with their clubs, the priests with their blessings, the merchants with their gossip. You watch from your doorway, hands dusted in flour, a silent witness to the endless, grinding theater of the street. Sometimes you are cast as the hero, sometimes as the villain, more often as the invisible background, just another figure moving through the city's slow, relentless choreography. The day wears on, each hour like a pebble in your shoe, annoying, persistent, impossible to ignore. You work until you cannot stand, then work a little more. Meals are scraps and afterthoughts, rest a luxury you do not expect. When the sun sets and the last loaf is sold or stored away, you begin the evening's chores: cleaning, patching, counting, worrying. You sweep the floor again, as if by force of habit you might finally win the battle against the dirt. Night falls, as it always does. You lock the door, bank the fire, count the coins and debts and regrets. You sit in the gloom, staring at the dying candle, your mind running through the same old calculations. What did you earn today? What did you lose? What must be done tomorrow? You climb into bed, feeling every bruise, every failure, every small victory. The room is cold, but you pull the blanket tighter and wait for sleep, knowing it will be shallow, interrupted, and haunted by the dreams and fears that have become as familiar as your own heartbeat. There are nights when you wonder why you continue, why you rise again and again to face a world that cares so little whether you succeed or fail. But the answer is always the same, because you must. Because bread does not bake itself. Because hunger does not wait. Because survival is not something you choose. It is something you do again and again until you cannot, you know, with a kind of grim certainty that tomorrow will be the same. The sun will rise, the work will begin, the customers will come, the day will drag on until it disappears into night, and you will do it all over again. There will be no miracle, no sudden reprieve, no happy ending, just the endless, looping repetition of labor, exhaustion, and the faintest thread of hope. Still, in the hour before dawn, as the city lies silent and the world feels new, you allow yourself a moment, just a moment, to imagine something different. Maybe one day the bread will rise perfectly, the fire will burn steady, the coins will add up, and the debts will fade. Maybe one day you will eat a meal that fills you, sleep a night that truly rests you, wake to a day that does not weigh so heavily on your shoulders. But as the first rooster crows and the city stirs, you set the dream aside and rise to face the day, because the cycle is all you have. The life of the baker is a circle drawn in ash and flour, repeated endlessly across the years. No one thanks you, no one remembers you, and yet, somehow, the bread is there each morning, a small, stubborn proof that for all its misery, the world still turns. And so you rise, and so you begin again,